Hello, my name is Rob Fox. I was invited to give a presentation to the Collectors Club of Chicago, and given the current situation with the COVID-19 pandemic, it was, of course, canceled, and we are doing our duty and staying at home. Uh, but because people still might like to be involved with their hobby, and I'm willing to do a little experimentation here and see if this will work. We're going to record a relatively short presentation, a segment of what I was going to do, and we'll see how it goes and whether things turn out nicely. So what I'm going to do is you can see I'm over here in the top right. I'm actually going to turn off the video of me in a little bit because you probably would prefer to see the things on the screen. For those of you that haven't seen me before, hello. And let's go ahead and get on to the topic at hand. Actually, there might be a little bit more about me here. All right, so maybe I should introduce myself some, however. Those of you who do not know me, you might know me in postal history circles as the guy who collects and exhibits the 24-cent 1861 stamp from the United States. I have been collecting that issue since about, well, the late 1990s into about 2000. I've been exhibiting that particular stamp since 2000. Started with a single frame at that time. As far as occupations are concerned, I actually have, oddly enough, a PhD in computer science and adult education. And because I have that degree, I now run a small diversified vegetable and poultry farm, hence the Planet Junior cover you see down on the bottom left. The interesting thing about this particular cover is this tool that you see right here is not terribly dissimilar to some of the actual tools we still use on our farm. The biggest difference is there's a lot more use of plastics than there was at the point that this cover was an advertising cover in 1918. So there I am. You can see me at the top right wearing my uniform. That red hat is something you might recognize when I do get to go to a stamp show. I tend to put that hat on so people know who I am. So let's go ahead and get to the topic at hand. With the 24-cent stamp from 1861, you can see a copy of it on this blue cover at the bottom right. This is an 1861 issue stamp. And over here, you can see the 1860 issue, just a standard example paying the rate to England. Most of the 24-cent stamps would pay the 24-cent rate per half ounce for letter mail based on the U.S. British Convention of 1848. The interesting thing about this is the fact that the United States did not issue a 24-cent stamp until they did issue this one in 1860. It was used for a very short period of time and then, of course, demonetized and replaced with the 1861 issue. So there you have it. That's probably why I collect the 1861 issue, because I have a little bit more opportunity to explore what's going on with it. So we've got 24 cents per half ounce. And the interesting thing about it is it actually pays for different segments of the process of getting the mail to and from the United States and to the British system, to Great Britain, to the United Kingdom. And there were two ways that the money could be broken down for a standard 24-cent rate. One way would be using an American packet or American ship under contract with the United States that would carry the mail to England. And in this case, what happened is 3 cents would go to the British. And that's why we have this marking right here that says we're going to send, of this 24-cent stamp, 3 cents belong to the British. And that's for their own internal surface mails. The rest of the money was kept by the United States, of which 16 cents went to covering the transatlantic postage, the crossing of the Atlantic, and 5 cents was kept for surface mail in the United States. Interesting note for those of you who might care. This is a Davenport, Iowa hand stamp, and I am located in Iowa, though a ways away from Davenport. And this 3-cent marking is the Chicago rocking 3-cent marking. In other words, this went from Davenport to Chicago. Chicago was the exchange office, and the exchange office would take foreign mail. It would put these markings on it indicating what portion of the postage was intended for the foreign postal service, and then they would place them in mail bags, and they were not taken out until they reached an exchange office at the destination country. So in this case, there's your London marking there. They took it out in London, they put this marking on it here, and now it went about going through the process of getting to its destination. Down here at the bottom, we have a British packet example. And in this case, the British there's your 19 right there, they get 19 cents of the 24 gets passed on to Britain. The surface mail 3 cents and the packet 16 cents. And the US gets to keep 5 cents. And that is how they would break down the postage in general between the two countries. It depended very much on who was paying for the transatlantic services. And that's where the 16-cent swing comes from. So here is an example of the second rate level, or you would call it the double rate. This is for mail over a ½ ounce and up to 1 ounce. And it's important for you to keep in mind that this is a second rate level, and there are some exceptions as we get into the higher rates that will be very interesting. The top item here was mailed, and it went through the Boston Exchange office. And you'll notice that I gave you a scan here, a little bit of a tracing because I had to make some modifications. This is on the back of the cover. And you'll notice there's a 6 up here, and that 6 indicates that 6 cents were going to the British postal system. This went via an American contract packet. So the Americans, the United States, got to keep most of the money, most of the postage, but 6 cents had to go to the British system. What's interesting about this is this 6 on the front and the Boston American packet marking on the back seems to be consistent whenever Boston mails had closed to go via New York or Boston, leaving on those ships. And this was then sent up to Quebec, and it left Quebec on the Allen line. And the couple of examples I have found that went from Boston to Quebec tend to have this Boston marking on the back. The bottom cover here is another example of an American packet. And there's our rocking 6 from Chicago. So this thing was a double rate, a little bit larger envelope, and it went via Chicago. And by going via Chicago, it was placed in the mail bag, and then it traveled by rail. And in this case, it would have traveled by rail once again up to Quebec. During the winter, it would have gone on to Portland, Maine. And here's the third rate level. This is where things get a little bit interesting because a lot of people like to talk about the 24-cent rate as being 24 cents per ½ ounce. But the reality is that from 1848 up to 1866, there weren't odd multiples of the 24-cent rate. Instead, it jumped for every ounce. It was 48 cents. There was no interval from 1 to 1½ ounces or 1½ to 2 ounces. It was a full ounce at this time. So if you were over an ounce, you had to pay a fair amount of postage. You had to pay 96 cents. And that's what this cover shows us doing. This cover is more interesting than that. It features a San Francisco too late marking. If you look over here, this has a November 29 date docket that was probably written by this company here. And this company has a November 30 date stamp on the back. That's their company marking. It's clear that they hoped or expected to catch the steamer from San Francisco to go down via Panama. They were hoping to catch that steamer. They put the date here, but it arrived too late for the steamer. But since they gave this docket right here saying they expected to go via steamer, Then this was held on to, and you'll notice that the postmark is December 10 for San Francisco. We've got that here as well. And it took the steamer via Panama, and it made its way to New York, which is here. On January 1st, it left New York and then made its way to Liverpool. What's interesting about this is an 1867 usage, and the end of 1867 was actually the end of the 24-cent rate for the United States to British destinations. This is where it gets even more interesting. Can you imagine paying some of the postage for something and then being told you haven't paid enough, and then being asked to pay for all the postage for the privilege of looking at the mail you've just received? This is what ended up happening during this period of time, is that if you didn't pay enough postage, then you had to pay as if no postage had been applied in the first place. So over here, we have an example where they paid 24 cents for a morning cover. We've got this black edge indicating that this is a death announcement of some kind. And they paid 24 cents, but apparently it weighed more than a half ounce and less than 1 ounce. So 48 cents were due. Each 24 cent is actually equal to a shilling. So what ended up happening is it went to London. It was delivered here to Langsdowne Terrace. And there's a 2 shilling marking right here. So for the benefit of getting this piece of mail with the death announcement in it, they had to pay 2 shillings. And this marking right here is telling the British that the United States is expecting 42 cents being sent back to them of the postage they collect from the 2 shillings. Now that's interesting because that shows us that the US is getting 42 cents, but they've already collected 24 cents here, but the 24 cents wasn't used for any kind of postal service. So they come out smelling like a rose in this case. Down here is an example with a British packet. And once again, we paid 24 cents. It weighed too much. There's 2 shillings due. You can see 2 markings for 2 shillings. And this one went via British packet, so only 10 cents are intended to be returned to the United States. You'll notice that the exchange markings are in black, and black is an indicator that they are not paid. What makes this even more interesting is the fact that this one was initially marked as paid, and then the black marking was placed over it along with a short paid marking here. So apparently somebody thought, oh, this was okay, and then maybe not. It's not okay. So let's talk about those odd rates for a moment here. If you'll take a look, we have one of the articles from the Postal Convention, and it gives an example of what the rate increments were. For everything up to a half an ounce, you get 1 single rate. Half an ounce, but not exceeding an ounce, is 2. And then we jump to the 1 ounce to 2 ounces is 4 rates. 2 to 3 is 6. 3 to 4 is 8, etc., etc., etc. What is interesting about this is they are making the implication that there is the potential for 3 rates, 5 rates, 7 rates, but they're not giving us anything as far as a rate amount for those. So what that means is here we are once again with something that clearly must have weighed between 1 ounce and 1.5, up to 1.5 ounces. The person who was mailing it said, okay, fine, we'll put 3 24-cent stamps on there. That should be enough. But according to this, you have to pay it as if it's 4 rates. So once again, this went across the pond. They attempt to deliver it with a 4 shilling marking on here saying, all right, you owe us 4 shillings. Of that, 20 cents comes back to the United States. Imagine that. And now we have all this 72 cents sitting over here, postage that was paid. Once again, that doesn't mean anything. But it gets better. So here's another example. This is an attempt at a 5 times rate. Okay, this would be between over 2 ounces and up to 2.5 ounces is what they were attempting to do. And so they put 5 24-cent stamps on there. And once again, this was not valid. And if we look down here in Article 3, what's important here is it's not permitted to pay less than the whole combined rate that was due. This is the part, or this is the article in the agreement between the two countries that essentially said, hey, you can't do this, which means these don't count for anything, and you owe us 6 shillings. That's an awful lot of money for that day and age. So you can imagine what that might be like. So now the question is, how does the United States get away with, and the Britain get away with this? You've paid postage, but now none of it's applied. Let's think about it a different way. Up to this point, people were able to send mail unpaid. And a lot of what was happening, especially in years prior, is people would send unpaid mail. It would have a due amount at the recipient, and the recipient would then refuse delivery of the letter. At that point, there has been no postage collected, and yet all of the services have been rendered. So part of the motivation behind this is likely to attempt to get people to start prepaying and to get out of the situation where you're providing a service with no compensation. So when you look at it that way, you can begin to see that maybe there are some good reasons for this. And as we get into the later 1860s and approach the Universal Postal Union, this kind of approach where part paid is treated as not paid at all starts to go away. We start to see people just paying the deficiency, maybe with an extra fee, or just the deficiency, depending on the agreement. Well, there was some good news in April of 1866. Remember, this started in 1848. Up till April of 1866, these odd rates weren't allowed. But then we have this nice little announcement here that, you know what, we're going to go ahead and allow those odd rates. And this ended at the end of 1867 because there was a new treaty that was enacted that started at the beginning of 1868. So we have about a year and a half where you can find these triple rates that are validly paid. We see a 57 and a 3 here, and what that means is it's a 3 times or a triple rate, and 50 cents in credit is going to be sent to the British system because it went via a British packet, fully paid, ready to go. So we've got 15 cents going to the British. Of that, 9 cents go to the surface mails, and 48 cents go for the Atlantic packet service. You'll notice that each of these things ends up tripling. It's just a linear progression. So in a way, you can consider the fact that the packet service is making out pretty well on this one. Over here on the top left, you can see, you maybe noticed this in some of the others, that occasionally you will find docketing that explain which ship the sender is expecting this to go by. They could and did have the right to give directives which sort of mail to go by. This is for the steamer Persia from New York on June 13th. And in fact, if you take a look at this, here's Boston British packet, June 12. So the June 12 is an indicator that it took ship or train from Boston to get to New York in time to leave on the Cunard Line ship on June 13, and then it arrived, it was taken out of the mail bag here on the 23rd. So here's an example that have no 24 centers on it, but I thought it might be interesting to show a couple of examples that came back the other way. Here's an example with 2 1-shilling Queen Victoria stamps on here. But what this is, before you start getting tempted to think that this is a double rate, note that the rate is 1 shilling up to a ½ ounce. 1 shilling is equal to 24 cents. This is actually a single rate. Part of the clue to this is we have a 5-cent marking here. So this went via the steamer Asia, which is a Cunard Line ship, which is under British contract. That means for a single rate, 5 cents is due to the United States to pay for just the surface mail. The British are taking care of the British packet, and they're taking care of their own surface mail with their shilling right here. The second shilling was placed on there because this was mailed at the Floating Row House, which is on the docks at Liverpool. So this was a type of supplementary mail service, and in order to use that service, they had to pay another shilling for that to go. The interesting thing about this piece is it actually has a letter there inside of this thing that's very short. Seems like it was probably written on the dock, and it pretty much just says, "Hey, I'm here on the dock, and the boat's about to leave, and I'm going to use the Floating Row House to send this." Otherwise, there really isn't a whole lot of reason to do it. So this is almost kind of a, "Hey, look at me, I'm using the Floating Row House" type of letter. The one down here is more interesting to me because this is what comes about when you actually know some of your rates and when things changed. This has a 1 shilling and a 2 shilling stamp paying a triple rate. So this one is after the April 1866 modification to the treaty. And it was a triple rate. It goes via the Persia. And once again, via the Persia, that would be another Cunard line. And we have a crown red 15 that says 15 cents ends up going to the United States. That confirms also that this is a triple rate and recognized as such. And we notice it says via Cork. So this item left, and if we take a look at this right here, this looks like we can say that this went via Cork. It left probably via the Irish mail train. It crossed the water to Dublin, and then it went down to Cork, where it got on the boat at Queenstown and left on its way to probably New York. And to close this one out, the new Postal Convention of 1868 changed the rate to 12 cents per half ounce. They did not put any restrictions on odd rates. It was just a straight linear progression. This was effective January 1st, 1868. And since the 24-cent stamp was issued to primarily service the 24-cent rate to British destinations, the prominence of the 24-center is decreased significantly. It was used for maybe multiple rates, such as this item right here, which is a double multiple rate of the 12 cent. If this marking here were a little bit clearer, you would see it would say New York paid all. At this point, they also stopped making those accountancy markings where they're passing 3 cents or 19 cents back and forth depending on the rate. At this point, what happens is the sending country is now paying for the transatlantic fees, and there's no reason anymore to pass those accountancy markings back and forth. And with this slide, we will come to a stopping point, and we'll see how this worked. I hope that you enjoyed this, and if this works well and people want to see more, I will gladly record more.